the boy from Nagrig. The sun had barely risen over Nagrig, a small Egyptian village veiled in dust and simplicity, when Mohammed slipped out the door. He clutched a scuffed football under one arm, his worn-out sandals slapping the cracked earth as he ran toward the open field. It wasn't much, just a patch of dry ground, but to him it was a stadium of dreams. His mother called after him, her voice soft but tired. She had grown used to these early escapes. His father, a government clerk with little to spare, worried more. "There's no future in chasing shadows," he once said. But Salah wasn't chasing shadows. He was chasing something only he could see. At school, teachers complained. He was too distracted. At home, his younger siblings watched him disappear into himself, sketching football formations on scraps of paper and copying Ronaldo's moves from a black and white TV. Yet no amount of correction could pull him away. Football wasn't a hobby. It was a lifeline. By the time he turned 12, Salah was traveling to Cairo 5 days a week, a grueling 4-hour round trip on crowded minibuses that smelled of sweat and fuel. He'd press his face against the window, watching farmlands blur into cityscapes, his heart pounding not from nerves, but from raw hunger. The Cairo club offered him a shot, but that's all it was, a shot. He wasn't taller than the goalposts. His muscles were stringy, his touch too soft. The coaches whispered behind clipboards, marking him as a kid with spirit but little else. The first few weeks were brutal. He trained with boys older and stronger. They mocked his accent, his village clothes, his relentless questions. "You'll never last here," one spat after a scrimmage. But Salah didn't answer. He watched. He learned. He stayed late after every session, juggling the ball alone while the sun dipped behind concrete buildings. By night, he returned home asleep on his father's lap, the motion of the bus rocking him like a cradle. There was no money for special shoes. His cleats were hand-me-downs. Meals were rationed. Yet every sacrifice seemed small in comparison to the dream. The central conflict in Salah's life wasn't poverty or distance. It was doubt. Everyone had it. Coaches, neighbors, even family. But he refused to let it infect him. Then came the trial that would decide his future. One last chance. The coach called out his name. Salah stepped forward, heart hammering, eyes on the ball like it was the only truth he knew. The whistle blew. By the end of that day, no one laughed at the boy from Nagrig anymore. The rise and the rejection. Switzerland was cold in a way Mohamed Salah had never known. The skies over Basel were gray, the language unfamiliar, the food bland, the streets too quiet. At just 20, he had left behind everything familiar for a chance at European football. But opportunity often comes wrapped in isolation. At FC Basel, Salah stood out, not immediately for his goals, but for his silence. He barely spoke German, and English was a daily battle. But the ball didn't care about language. With it at his feet, he could express everything he struggled to say. Swift, intelligent runs, dazzling footwork, relentless pressure. Slowly, the Swiss league took notice. Opponents feared his pace. Commentators praised his composure. His name began to echo beyond the Alps. Then came the call from Chelsea. The Premier League, a dream, a kingdom where Salah imagined his name among legends. But reality struck differently. At Stamford Bridge, he was a ghost in a palace. Signed with fanfare, quickly forgotten. He'd sit on the bench, cold and restless, staring as minutes slipped by. Mourinho, the manager at the time, didn't trust him. In a team of giants, Salah was seen as a gamble, and not one worth taking. Doubt returned, this time wearing a tailored suit. Still, he trained hard. First to arrive, last to leave. But dedication doesn't always win you minutes. Critics labeled him a misfit. English football, they said, was too physical, too fast for a featherweight like him. When the club announced he'd be loaned out, first to Fiorentina, then to Roma, it felt like an exile. But Salah didn't see it that way. In Florence, he ran like a man trying to reclaim something stolen. He ripped through defenses, scored wonder goals, and left Italian commentators breathless. The crowd called him Il Faraone, the Pharaoh. Yet it wasn't revenge he sought. It was respect. Roma deepened the transformation. Salah didn't just play, he led. He learned to fight without fouling, to endure tackles without protest. He became stronger both in body and in mind. On and off the pitch, his identity sharpened. A devout Muslim, humble in interviews, devastating in attack. He didn't need the headlines. He needed the work. And he did the work. By the time Liverpool came calling, Salah was no longer a castaway. He was a storm waiting for the right sky. He returned to England not as the boy who had failed, but as the man who had been forged by failure. The rejection at Chelsea hadn't broken him. It had built him. Now, the Premier League would see what it had missed. The King of Anfield. When Mohamed Salah stepped onto the pitch at Anfield in the red of Liverpool, the air felt different. It wasn't just a transfer. It was a homecoming to a place he'd never lived. From his first touch, there was electricity, a kind of urgency that whispered, "He's not here to prove a point, he's here to change the game." Under Jurgen Klopp's chaotic brilliance, Salah found a system that embraced his chaos. The speed, the instinct, the lethal left foot, all of it unleashed. He wasn't a winger anymore. He was a force. A blur down the right flank, cutting in, curling the ball into corners as if bending the laws of physics. Defenders couldn't catch him. Goalkeepers couldn't read him. Fans couldn't get enough. By the end of his first season, he had scored 44 goals in all competitions, more than any debutant in Liverpool history. The Premier League had doubted him once. Now it bowed to him. But it wasn't just about goals. It was the way he scored them, humble yet ruthless, joyful yet precise. Every celebration, hands pointed to the sky, carried the weight of a boy from Nagrig who had refused to quit. Still, success never travels alone. It brings expectation, pressure, and rivals. Liverpool surged to the 2018 Champions League final, Salah at the heart of it all. The night in Kiev was meant to be his coronation. But destiny, cruel and unscripted, had other plans. Just 30 minutes in, a brutal tackle by Sergio Ramos drove Salah's shoulder into the ground. He lay on the turf, face twisted in agony, tears carving through sweat. It wasn't just pain, it was heartbreak. The man who had carried a club on his back was forced off the field on the biggest stage of his life. They lost that night, and Salah watched the trophy slip away, not from defeat, but from absence. The world wondered, would he recover? Would the fear linger? Would the magic fade? Didn't. He returned the next season sharper, faster, more determined. No theatrics, no vendettas, just fire. He led Liverpool back to the Champions League final, and this time he stayed on the pitch. In the second minute, Salah buried a penalty with ice in his veins. 90 minutes later, Liverpool were champions of Europe. Months later, they did the unthinkable. They won the Premier League. After 30 years of waiting, Anfield erupted, and Salah stood at the center of it all. He was no longer just a success story. He was a symbol of redemption, resilience, and quiet revenge. But for Salah, glory wasn't the final chapter. Legacy beyond football. Fame had found Mohamed Salah, but it never changed him. At the height of his glory, with headlines calling him the Egyptian king and children worldwide wearing his number, Salah returned to Nagrig. Not with cameras or fanfare, but with purpose. The boy who once ran barefoot through dusty fields now paved roads for others to walk with dignity. His wealth didn't build fences. It built bridges. He funded a new school in his village, then a hospital, then an ambulance fleet. When a family couldn't afford treatment, he paid quietly. When a man lost his livelihood, Salah restored it without hesitation. He didn't announce these acts. He simply acted. His faith remained central, not as performance but as principle. In post-match interviews, he thanked God before anyone else. On the field, his sujud, the act of bowing in prayer after goals, became a symbol of visibility for millions of Muslims around the world. Where some athletes chased endorsement deals, Salah chased meaning. Yet his legacy wasn't limited to charity or religion. It was cultural, political, human. In a time when Europe often feared the unfamiliar, Salah stood at the intersection of excellence and identity. A devout Muslim, an African, a father, a champion, and forced the world to reconsider its assumptions. In England, Reports showed a measurable drop in Islamophobic incidents during his peak years. Why? Because when people saw Salah, they saw not a headline or stereotype, they saw a human being they admired. He didn't shout. He showed. Through discipline, kindness, and brilliance, he challenged prejudice not with confrontation, but with presence. But greatness always demands balance. He faced scrutiny when Egypt's national team fell short. Fans demanded more, critics grew louder. Some accused him of dividing his attention. Yet Salah never lashed out. He absorbed pressure like he absorbed tackles with poise. He was more than Liverpool's hero. He became a mirror for millions, a reflection of what it meant to rise with integrity, to succeed without arrogance, to remember where you came from. Now, in his 30s, the question echoes, what will Salah leave behind? His answer is already unfolding, not in statues or trophies, but in the lives he's touched. A girl studying in the school he built, a man walking because of a road he paved, a child watching him on television, realizing they too can dream without borders. Salah once chased a dream across deserts and borders. Now he's giving dreams